Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey, David. How are you doing today?
Good. Big news. Vegas won the Cup. Let's move on to Oilers things now.
It's finally over.
I always have a hard time watching the playoffs once the Oilers are out. And this year in particular, it was bitter because I really do think the Oilers were the better team in terms of talent, better players. And I think they got out-coached and out-goalied and some bad puck luck. And those three things combined. And Vegas got by them. But I find it very frustrating. The out-goalied thing will happen. But the out-coached and the puck luck thing drives me a little bit crazy because if you just get a few bounces and you win. And the coaching strategy,
many bounces away.
Sure, the coaching strategy was
forcing a Game 7.
Yeah, sorry, I was talking over you there. What did you think of Vegas winning?
Well, I mean, I'm not totally thrilled. I'm glad it took them 6 years, so the Oilers can still claim the record of modern era expansion teams winning the Cup in 5 years. And of course, some will say it wasn't an expansion team, it was a merger, and that is a moot point. But Oilers came in the NHL in 79, and Peter Pocklington promised in November of 79 they'd win the Cup within 5 years, and wouldn't you know it, they did it. It's one of the most outrageous, outlandish predictions ever that actually came to pass. And now the Vegas owner, apparently he told Bettman that he would win the Cup in 6 years, so he sets his sights a little lower, but bang on. And Bettman sure seemed happy that they won it. Let's just say that. There was a
Gary Bettman,
I really like that guy. Things that kind of worked out in Vegas's favor over the course of all of this, including yet another salary cap boondoggle, and there was a lot of people from a lot of different towns, not just Edmonton, that were questioning some of the officials' decisions right to the end, like the goal last night that wasn't shot into the net until after the whistle went, but somehow it was allowed to count. And we've seen perfectly good goals not counted for less good reasons than that. But anyway, it's spilled milk now. They got it. They were the best team, and they had a great coach in Bruce Cassidy. I think that made a big difference to them from the team that missed the playoffs last year. And they were able to aggressively change the roster, which is one thing that they've done very differently from a lot of teams, not just the Edmonton Oilers, in terms of the way that they unceremoniously dispatched guys like Marc-Andre Fleury or Max Pacioretty. Just be gone. We want the latest hot free agent here, whether it's Pietrangelo or whether it's Eichel in the trade, or
Robin Lehner
or Mark Stone, or all those guys came in by, in high-profile transactions. And for a while there, I'm thinking they're just spinning their wheels, just spitting out guys that are just as good as the guys they're bringing in. But clearly, it's paid off for them, and they had 4 lines deep, Dave, and 3 defense pair, and very few injuries. Other than the net, and the one in net actually, or the 2 in net actually worked out for them, because I think the guy who wound up playing the best only got his chance because the other guys were hurt.
Every goalie thrived. Could have been the goaltending coach, probably partly the goaltending coach. Sean Burke gets a lot of props, but Bruce, their system.
He's good.
We've talked about their system. It limits the highest quality scoring chances against the goalie. He's protected by 2 quality defensemen. I think 3 acquisitions to that team made a huge difference to that team in recent years. The 3 players who stood out, I mean, aside from their existing core, obviously Jack Eichel. I mean, that's a franchise center. They took a risk because he was injured, though.
Yes.
And the risk paid off. He was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Alex Martinez is the best defensive defenseman I've seen in the NHL this year. He played that system, or either that or that system was tailor-made to his strengths. Bruce, against the Oilers, he hardly made a mistake on a grade A shot against. He was just unbelievably good. He was always in position. He won almost all of his battles. And it just struck me how a smart defenseman in the right system can dominate a game. And this is the challenge for the Oilers coaches, to get the right system for the defensemen they have, like Ekholm, Ceci, Nurse, DeHarnay, all great big guys, superb in the slot, I believe, or could be in the right system.
Mm-hmm.
So the third guy is Cassidy, the coach, who developed that.
Right.
And I just can't say enough about the work that he did. And there was I can't recall the name of the Vegas podcaster who, heading into the Oilers series, said that the difference was going to be goaltending and the coaching, and the Vegas had it over the Oilers in both categories. And I have to admit, scoffed a little bit at both notions, but I'm not scoffing now. That broadcaster was dead right. Mm-hmm. He was the most astute analyst out of Las Vegas, and he's just a guy, a longtime fan who runs a hockey memorabilia store in Vegas, trading cards. Man, did he know what he was talking about, though. And it wasn't just that example. There was a number of things that he talked about where he just showed a really high knowledge of hockey. So maybe I'll try to get his name by the end of this podcast. But Cassidy did the job.
Naming the goaltending when your number one's been out all year and your new number one is knocked out and out for the entire playoffs, it's a gutsy call. And then when their number three guy, Laurent Brossoit, got knocked out of the playoffs in the Edmonton series, and they wound up going with the number 4, Adin Hill, you think they're probably on the ropes by now. And that was a major turning point in their favor. And that Hill came in and he was red hot the whole rest of the way, really. And, they had the magic formula, and they got some breaks along the way. And, they had, for instance, before the Stanley Cup Finals, they got 4 days of rest, even though that meant that Florida had to rest 10 days. And that took me right back to 2006 when Oilers playing Carolina. And the Oilers had to wait 2 more days so Carolina could recover from Game 7. And it was one of those bones of contention that comes up from time to time. But anyway, the tumblers kept dropping in the right places for Vegas, and clearly by the end, they broke the record of the greatest team of all time, 1985 Stanley Cup Finals, for scoring 9 goals in a Stanley Cup clinching game, beating the 85 Oilers record of 8. So not bad when you're breaking goal-scoring records by the Edmonton Oilers of the 1980s. But they were pounding them in all playoffs, David. I haven't got the final numbers yet. But every goalie that faced Vegas, starting goalie that faced Vegas, from Connor Hellebuyck to Stu Skinner to Jake Ottinger to Sergei Bobrovsky, who was a bona fide Conn Smythe candidate ending this series, and Vegas shredded those guys 4 out of 4. They were shooting like 12% or more against all of them. The guys were in the 880s, 870s, save percentage. And whatever Vegas was doing, it worked against more than just the Oilers. In fact, the Oilers came closer probably than anyone to beating them.
The Vegas podcaster who said this was Chris Gowlick of the Locked On VGK podcast. And heading into the series against the Oilers, he said the following: give me the best coach and give me the best goaltending, and then we'll go from there and try to figure things out. We've got the notch in those 2 categories. Both those check marks go to Vegas.
Wow. And
he was dead right. All right, Bruce, it's a sad day for Oilers fans on a number of counts, and they're both serious in their own way. So first of all, Noah Philp. Daniel Nugent-Bowman interviewed Ken Holland, and Ken Holland has said that Philp needs to take this season off, and that he's handing in his retirement papers, it sounds like, essentially.
Wow.
And he needs to be in Calgary with his friends and family. So we don't know the circumstances for sure of what's going on here. It sounds like someone in need of support, and I think what we can say is this: Philp is 25. He is a really good prospect right now. He might have made the Oilers as a centerman on the 4th line this coming season. He had just a fantastic season as it went along in Bakersfield.
Yes.
He's 6'3", 200 pounds.
Just right shot.
The Oilers were right shot center. The Oilers were going to offer him a contract,
for sure. They're still
And
going to qualify him because if they
yeah,
qualify him, they keep his rights if he decides that his crisis is over to return to the game at some future point. The Oilers will retain their rights by having qualified him. But it's a bitter blow, and it's uh, as I say, we're not sure what the problem is. We've heard a couple of rumors that not good, but actually not relating to the player himself, but those who surround him. But that's all I'm prepared to say, because all I heard was a well-founded but rumor. So
yeah,
anyway,
we don't
kid's in
know.
a tough place, and we wish him well. That's all I'm going to say.
And good luck to him in the future. He's got his whole life ahead of him, so good luck to him. And my own hope as an Oilers fan, and he's pursued hockey as a dream his whole life, and I hope that I hope he actually comes back one day and picks it up again. Bruce, the other really tough news is TSN 1260 went off the air today. Sports radio station. I mean, I've been listening to 1260. It used to be 1260 CFRN.
It used to be the Team 1260, and then TSN bought it.
I grew up listening to 1260 and Rod Phillips, and it was, now it's, there's lots of really popular hosts, including our good friend Alan Mitchell. You've been on that show for years, Bruce.
At least 10 years. I can't even keep count of it, David. All I know is I woke up this morning thinking I'm going to be ready for my radio interview at 11 o'clock. And I listened to Dustin Nielsen interview Ryan Rishaug at 8:30, like he always has, the morning mandate, one of their popular features every day. And then at 9 o'clock, I heard I saw Jason Greger's tweet. I couldn't believe it. So I turned on the radio, and all it was playing was on a little loop, some radio, some hold music. And then this little announcement saying that they've gone off the air and that it was inevitable and so on. And thanks to this and that and the other. But this was Bell Media pulling the plug, as they've done previously on 3 of the other TSN radio stations. Today, I understand it was 6 radio stations that got axed and various other 1,300 jobs or something. And this from a corporation that pulled down a record $2.9 billion profit last year. So let that sink in. But apparently this little branch, every line item that doesn't make money gets under scrutiny these days, because damn it, we want to get up to 3.0 billion next year. Or 2.91 or whatever, it's frustrating in the extreme. There are a lot of fans, sports fans, and fans of TSN 1260, and fans and friends of the people who've lost their job today who are quite beside ourselves in terms of the loss. I've been listening to that station just about every day, every weekday for 15 years, David, and I get a lot of my information from there. I used to. And there are a lot of other people. I read one guy that said his car's been set to 1260 for 15 years, and he doesn't know how to change the station. So what's he going to do? So anyways, I'm sad to lose my little 15-minute soapbox every week, but I'm very sad for friends and acquaintances that work for the station, like my friend Alan Lowtide Mitchell and Dave Jameson, Dustin Nielsen, Lieutenant Eric, the producers that were a big part of the shows, and the hosts as well, in terms of Gregor and Strudwick that made the team in the afternoon. All these people are looking for different platforms or a different line of work now, and I think some of these guys, career-long radio guys, like media guys like Lowtide and Jameson, the show I was on. These are guys that are, in the range of 60 years old, and all of a sudden, whoop, their job's gone. Now what? And both dealing with personal tragedy in their life at this particular time, just to make it that much tougher.
I don't follow the Elks. Do they broadcast the Elks games on the radio?
It's the same as hockey. Ched's got the games, and TSN 1260 did most of the coverage throughout the week.
I see.
But Ched has the actual broadcast of the game, and TSN, I think they had a pregame and postgame for the Elks, just like they do did for the Oilers, even as in between times they didn't cover the hockey game, but they had pre and post games, lots of call-in, lots of listener interaction, and it's all up in smoke as of today.
Yeah. There's one difference now, and this is one of the reasons the stations failed, is there's competitions from other platforms online. So I suspect that a lot of these people, Alan Mitchell's already working for The Athletic and doing outstanding work there. I suspect we're going to see some new podcasts pop up here, and new online content. And a lot of the people who are at the front end of the shows are going to continue to work. There's a lot of people perhaps at the back end, not so lucky though, because podcasts and blogs tend to be done on a shoestring and with little technical support. So you might gather watching this podcast. And
little?
So no, none.
Upgrade.
260 plus guys trying to figure out the internet. Adventures in internetology. So good luck to them all. Really good luck to them all. And I'm sure some of them are going to land on their feet, and I'm sure some of them are going to thrive, maybe in a way they never expected, in unexpected ways. And that's what I'm hoping to see.
Well, my son reminds that, and I saw this just recently, that actual new vehicles are going to be produced without AM radio capabilities going forward. So AM is going the way of the dodo bird, period. And, that was just one of the leading edge things. I mean, a lot of people listen to it in their car. Well, apparently they're not going to have that option anymore. So more and more the push will be to FM or to, satellite radio, certainly. And maybe they'll have some way to interact with, podcasts and other platforms as well. But it's a sad day. There's no getting past that. I'm
First
down
they took away
about it. Yeah.
First they took away our CD players, or our cassette players. Then they took away our CD players. Then they took away our key ignition. And then next is the AM radio. What's next? All right, Bruce, let's move on. So Daniel Nugent-Bowman of one of these new internet sites, The Athletic, which also laid off a bunch of people last week, or this week, he did an interview with Ken Holland. And I thought it was actually a really interesting interview, in that I don't think I've ever seen Holland kind of the tough hockey side of him come out more than in this interview. Just how hard-headed he is, and it just really, So the first example I'll go with is his interview with about when he's asked about Steve Staios. And, there's probably some Oiler fans wringing their hands like, we got to keep Steve Staios. Like, we just got to do this. And he might go to Ottawa and, move on to a different job, and we're going to lose this bright young management guy. And Ken Holland's comment was basically, que sera, sera. And he says, quote, "We'll see what the future brings. I've never really worried about that. There are lots of good people in the business. People move around. They come and they go." Unquote. So now this, as a negotiating position with Steve Staios, and as a public position, I think that's the perfect thing to say. If they're keen, let's say they're actually super keen to keep Steve Staios, that would then be a negotiation, and you don't want to be so desperate in public to keep the guy. But I also do think, on a certain level, there's a certain amount of truth to this. There are lots of really good people in the world, and organizations lose people all the time, and they replace them. And the organizations, if they're generally well run, they go on. Now, the argument will be from many fans, well, the Oilers aren't generally well run. It's a crap show with the Oilers, and it's started. It's been that way forever. Since the internet came in existence and we could all voice our opinion, it's been that way. But I would say I don't really actually think it is that way in a number of aspects of the Oilers organization. They do seem to have some good people in Keith Gretzky and Brad Holland, and they and Jay Woodcroft, and I think in Ken Holland at the top. Now, could they add more good people? And was I glad to see Staios go there? Yeah, I'm glad he's there, and I hope he stays. But I do think two things. If you're going to hire someone to replace Ken Holland, have a full search in public job search, which they've never done. And second, if they did that, they'll get some really good candidates. So those two things. Your take.
Yep. Yeah, no argument really. And I mean, my take, being an Oiler fan of long memory and of a certain mindset, remembers the Oilers getting dinged with 2 draft choices for picking up Peter Chiarelli and Todd McClellan after they'd been cast aside from the previous clubs for what they called executive compensation. And the Oilers lost a 2nd and a 3rd round pick because of that. The whole idea of the executive compensation idea came with the idea of rewarding teams who developed young executives that then went elsewhere. For instance, when Steve Yzerman went from Detroit to Tampa, Detroit got nothing. And that was kind of, saying, well, we developed this guy for another organization. They just came in and took him. That can't be. Well, this is what the Oilers are now doing with Steve Staios. And wouldn't you know, that executive compensation boondoggle, as I called it at the time, lasted all of 9 months, and 2 teams got screwed out of 2 draft picks each, Edmonton Oilers and Ottawa Senators, which just happens to be the 2 teams being named in this Steve Staios situation. So anyway, it's just bad timing and bad luck. But boy, the Oilers seem to get a lot of that, where this stupid policy was in place for 9 months and the Oilers paid twice over for it, and now they're shoes on the other foot, and the rule doesn't exist anymore.
They should have got compensatory picks after they got rid of that rule. Almost. It was like, anyway. All right, Bruce. So the Oilers, Nugent Bowman was also asking him about, maybe bringing in another player. And Ken Holland is. Right now, there's a rumor, for instance, that Travis Konecny might come to the Oilers. And Travis Konecny is a top-scoring winger. He scored. He's like 40th, 41st, something like that overall for even strength scoring, 5-on-5 scoring for a forward last season. The guy can score, but Holland's already said a couple of weeks ago on Stauffer's show, can you bring in a player? No, unless he's going to make peanuts. So this time, Nugent Bowman just asked him directly, can you shoehorn in another high-priced player under the salary cap? And Ken Holland's answer was, quote, no chance, unquote. So he's telling, so there's lots of fans who are getting their hopes up about Konecny, and you can make an argument for it. Yeah. Listen, there's all kinds of arguments you can make for Konecny or Colton Parayko or whoever you're thinking, right? Whichever, like, and it's always enticing to think about it. It's fun to think about these things. It's fun to debate it. You look at the player, you think where he could fit, and people get their. But this is, Bruce. They have $6 million. Yeah. They've got to sign 6 more players, and one of them's Evan Bouchard, who's going to get, and McLeod, who are going to get more than $1 million each. This is not.
They could get $6 million, just the 2 of them.
So Holland is also saying that he's not prepared to just overturn his lineup. Now, there's some people who are probably thinking, we've got to be like Las Vegas, the hard, cold-eyed, alligator blood, death stare Vegas management, and just axe this guy and axe that guy and move along. Well, maybe these guys all have no trade clauses in Edmonton as well. I don't know. They traded for a couple of guys. Pacioretty, I don't know what his situation was when they got rid of him. If he agreed to get moved out or if he had a no-movement clause.
They moved him for basically free. They essentially gave him to Carolina Hurricanes just to get rid of the cap hit. And Carolina took all of the cap hit, and they took the player, and he blew out his Achilles twice this year, and it wound up being not much help to Carolina. And then Vegas had made cap space that made some of their other moves possible. So,
well, they were aggressive. They got Eichel. They
yep,
gave up a lot for Eichel.
yep,
They got Peter Angelo. They gave
yep.
up. They gave up useful players for Peter Angelo.
He was a free agent
Oh,
signing.
that was free agent. That's right.
But they gave up a ton of money, and they they also picked up Mark Stone. They gave up a big passel of players, prospects, picks for Stone, and they got their captain.
And Ken Holland is such a coward that he brought in the only things he ever done is brought in Zach Hyman, Matthias Ekholm, and Evander Kane with the cap hardly going up. I mean, Ken Holland has made some really gutsy moves. The Evander Kane signing was a super gutsy move. It was really unpopular. People were irate about that, Bruce. There was people who were profoundly offended by that.
Yes, no, I understand.
And most GMs wouldn't have done that move. They didn't. That's why there was no market for Kane. So anyway, I know there's this right now, this narrative about how hard-edged the Vegas management team is, and there's some truth to that. Like, they have made a lot of bold moves, but I don't know. You can only make so many. And they brought in Matthias. They found a way to bring in Matthias Ekholm this year. I'm not in the camp. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not in the camp that thinks Vegas is all that different than other management teams in the NHL, and that they're all drastically inferior to the Vegas brain trust. And I'm not in the camp that thinks Ken Holland's been sitting on his hands for 3 or 4 years.
Definitely not.
So
this business about Holland being uncreative, I don't think he's gotten enough kudos for some of the cap related transactions he made. We talked about that in the past, so I'll just leave it there. But Vegas, I mean, it's a very difficult comparison because Vegas has a background different from every other team in the NHL except Seattle, who's 4 years behind them. And that is that they joined the league just recently in by far the most generous terms to an expansion team that we've ever seen, going back to 1967. No expansion team got a deal like Vegas did, and they did great work. They had a great expansion draft. They had an even greater set of transactions around the expansion draft where they were able to acquire other assets by making promises to teams, like what they told Florida. Okay, we won't pick Alex Petrovich off you in the expansion draft. We'll pick Jonathan Marchessault instead. And oh yeah, you're going to send us Riley Smith. Well, guess what? Those two guys are still on the team 6 years later that they got it basically through the expansion draft process. They got William Karlsson in that process. They got Shea Theodore in a trade to protect Anaheim from losing, I think it was Clayton Stoner. I mean, they just absolutely shafted a few teams along the way, and they developed a good sort of underlying roster. But the other thing that came out of this, and this is sort of the lesser publicized aspect, and this was Seattle too, and Vegas, after their first year, not only did they have a decent core of players that they picked off of other teams' lists, like the 10th, 11th best players on all these teams and all the extra guys, but they had oodles of cap space. And cap space is the most valuable asset there is in the NHL in these days, and it's not even particularly close. And in their second year, Vegas basically went out and they bought an entire second line of Paul Stastny between Max Pacioretty and Mark Stone. And it was like a $20 million line of players that were fully established. In fact, their contracts had been signed basically elsewhere. And the Golden Knights were able to bring those guys in with the cap space to augment the good set of players they had. And let's face it, the management did good job in the first stage, and then they built on that, and they've made some gutsy moves, and they've made some unpopular moves like getting rid of Marc-Andre Fleury for basically they gave him away too just to get rid of his salary. And everything came up aces for them in 2023. So it's you know how many draft picks, Vegas draft picks they have who are on the team? One. Nicholas Hague, their number 6 defenseman that they picked in the draft. And every other guy on their team they got by some other method.
He's a pretty good player, that guy.
He's
I
a
have
pretty
to
good
say.
player, but I mean, you look at Edmonton's list of draft choices, for instance, you got McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins, Nurse, Yamamoto, Bouchard, Broberg, that's McLeod, Skinner. Like, they built a lot of the team through the draft, and the expansion team just went a whole different route. So it's very difficult to compare.
Didn't we hear
And
all those years that that's the way to go, is to build through the draft and have a
I've said
farm
it myself
system?
many
And
times.
yeah, and now it's suddenly, no, you have to be cold-eyed and making moves all
Well,
the time.
it's
It's a
just
bit
not
of
even
both,
fair
isn't
to
it?
compare, though, to Vegas, because
It
their
is.
their
It is.
circumstances are so different.
It is. And cap space, I think it became even more of a premium after COVID hit, and the cap
Yes.
didn't go up because of that.
Yes.
Like everything
Yeah.
stayed still for a couple years, and it's still staying still. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was even, it extended that advantage of having that extra cap space initially. Um, he he came off as Holland is fairly non-committal on Costin and Bouchard, saying basically, yeah, we're talking to him. We've given some offers. We got to work things out. Um,
Yeah.
but I thought it was interesting what he said about buyouts. Let me just find this section of the interview. Um, Let me go. He was asked, Nugent Bowman asked him, given your limited cap space, how would you like to approach free agency? And he said, Holland says, quote, well, if you look at our team, there are 5 big forwards in the top 6. Obviously, Yamamoto's played a lot of time up in there. I do know that we have to move a player out just to get cap compliant.
100%.
So he was not asked directly about Cutter Yamamoto. He was asked a question about getting cap space for free agency. And whose name pops out of his mouth? I mean, this
Yeah.
is no secret.
No.
We've all been talking about this for some time, but if you were looking for any kind of, if you were like doing witness statement analysis and trying to determine who's he going to move out, well, I think we just got a rather large tell there. And
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think, just a small percentage of fans would disagree at this point. The only question is, can they move him out and get a pick of some sort, or are they going to have to just buy him out? It's obviously preferable to get a draft pick.
Yep.
And I think there's a possibility they'll be able to get a draft pick. There's lots of teams, bottom feeders, who need to get to the floor, and he's not a bad player for a bottom feeder team to take a chance on. And like Montreal, I don't know what Montreal's caps. Montreal spends a lot of money.
They
Chicago,
got too many little
Arizona.
guys already.
Yeah, but Chicago, Arizona, like I could see one of those teams. And you just need a couple teams that are interested, and then that changes it from a buyout to you get a draft pick for the player. So I think that's going to happen. What do you think?
Yeah, well, what they don't want to do is be getting any salary back in that trade. I mean, they got to be trading to offload salary, because they are that stuck. Uh, they have most of last year's high-priced help, including Yamamoto, under contract going forward. In fact, there's not a single expiring contract worth more than $1.25 million. And those players, I mean, the best you can do is save 500 grand if you replace them with an NHL minimum guy. Well, they need more than 500 grand, right? They need 1.85 million just to pay Stuart Skinner's raise that's already been negotiated. They're probably going to need 2 million or more to pay Evan Bouchard's raise. They're probably going to have to pay better part of $1 million for Ryan McLeod's raise. And that's without adding any guys. That's just bringing the same guys back for higher money. And he's taken one step in the positive direction, bringing back Derek Ryan for 900,000. That was 1.25 million. So there's some marginal cap savings. But you save 350,000, you're going to have to save that quite a few times to pay for Evan Bouchard's raise, or Skinner's for that matter. They're dealing in the margins of the roster, where player out, player in means, changes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, but nothing in the millions. And they're going to need millions. Someone's going to have to go, and it might even be 2 guys that have to go out of the $3 million club, because all the other guys have no movement clauses.
Yeah. I think you could trade either CC, well, you could trade either CC, Kulak, or Fogel and get a draft pick back.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're all decent to good hockey players. Kulak might have the most value based on his playoffs and a 3-year deal. Like someone might think he's top 4 for their team for the next 3 years, like Chicago, for instance. Like they think, we need to have some steady players around Connor Bedard. He'd be really good. Or Ceci would work for them. I just don't see Holland moving either of them because he likes them. So this is, in some ways, the most interesting part was Ken Holland's speculations about Philip Broberg. And he just seems really torn. Here's the quotes. Quote, when you've got a Darnell Nurse on the left side and Ekholm and Kulak, they're pros, it's a dilemma. I don't really have an answer for you right now on Broberg. That's what I've got to sort out in the next couple of weeks. But being in the 7-hole, playing 5 minutes, I don't think that's doing much for his development and growth as a player. He needs to play 15 to 20 minutes. And then he said, I feel really good about our left side D. Broberg, can play right. I think he's most comfortable on left. Broberg's development and growth weighs on my mind on a regular basis. So it sounds like I think he thinks, and he said this, he and his staff think that this guy can play top 4. It's just a matter of how do you get him there? And what do you do in the meantime? So, you're trying to win a cup. And so you signed Kulak last season because you thought he'd step into the top 4, and he failed. So they had to bring in Ekholm. And then Kulak comes in the playoffs and suddenly steps up again and is fantastic. So if you had any thoughts on moving him out in the summer, it's probably gone by now. So this is a dilemma. It's a good one to have, but I don't know what they're going to do, Bruce. What would you do? What would be your solution?
Broberg's trade value wouldn't be very high at the moment because he really hasn't established a whole lot in the NHL level. He's shown flashes. He's had little stretches of play. He had some good results this year when he paired up with Evan Bouchard for a month or so on the third pairing, playing highly sheltered minutes. So you have to ask yourself how much of that is due to Broberg, how much of it's due to Bouchard, how much of it's due to the highly sheltered minutes. And, there would be a split in that answer. In a perfect world, he'd be the guy to go up on the second pairing with Nurse. In a perfect world, if he was ready, that you could just say, let's just run with him for 3 months with Nurse. Now we've got Ekholm and presumably Bouchard gets signed. We can lean on them as the top pairing, and we can use Nurse and Bouchard and, slightly less pressure-packed situation, and they can develop as a pairing. Now, here's the problem. Nurse has played nothing but heavy, tough, hardest competition for ever since Woodcroft arrived here. Broberg never plays the hardest, toughest competition. They're always seeming to shelter him. And they sheltered him, it seemed to me, just as much this year as they did last year. And in some ways, I'm quite discouraged that there wasn't much progress. By playoff time, he was an afterthought again. He dressed for a few more games because they were going 11-7, but he was playing like 4 minutes, like Holland said. And so that's very much an open question. And I'd like to think that the player has shown something, that he's, ready to step up and make a statement. But are you willing to bet a spot in the top 4 on that? That's where you move Ceci and you say, here's how we create cap space. We replace Ceci with Broberg.
Could you replace Ceci with Kulak? If you don't want to move Kulak, you can move Ceci and then Broberg's third pairing. Listen, I think personally Broberg showed enough last year that I'd be comfortable with him going into the year as third pairing defenseman on the left side.
Third pairing, yes.
And ready to step up. And on the other hand, the Oilers didn't have any injuries to speak of on their defense corps last year. They got lucky, super lucky. This is going to sort itself out. Like, if you're a realist, this will sort itself out sooner than later, probably sooner with an injury early in the year to a defenseman. And they're going to be glad they have Broberg to play then 10, 15 minutes a game, and he'll get his ice time. And I think that's a realistic scenario. You could trade either Kulak or Ceci. You'd have their cap space then. And that could help solve some problems. But I don't think you want to. I think in the right defensive system, and I do think the Oilers are going to move. I'm hearing enough. I think the Oilers are going to be moving more to a zone defense. They're going to move away from the system that they had, and I think Ceci can thrive in a system where it's just a more structured positional way of playing hockey. That's the way he plays already. And I think he'll do just fine. And Nurse will too. I think that the shutdown pairing is going to be considerably better with the new defensive structure. So I don't want to see him moved. I'd like to see that those guys. And I think Ekholm and Bouchard are going to be really strong too. And Kulak and Desharnais. And then someone's going to get hurt, and we're going to be glad that we have Philip Broberg, and it won't weigh so much. Ken Holland's mind will be, he'll think, yeah, I made the right call not moving anyone, and I knew this was the right call because defensemen get injured.
Yeah, well, usually they do. Like you say, this year it was exceptionally different in that all of Nurse and Bouchard and Kulak played 82 games. Ceci played 80. And then the combined pairing of Barry, who played 61, and Ekholm, who played 21 after the trade, they played 82 games. So they only had the sixth defense spot where they either had injuries or a little bit of, Ryan Murray was slotted in there. He got hurt. Desharnais got banged up when he was in there, but it was always the sixth spot they were looking to fill in. And so when Broberg did play, typically it was as number 6. Or number 7 in a 7-man unit. And so in fact, in some ways, his progress was maybe a little delayed by the lack of injuries, if you want to look at it that way.
It was, and it's unusual. And well, he was the one who got injured a couple times. Yeah. First, let's move. There was one final thing. Holland says he wants to go with a 22-man roster, not a 21-man roster. He wants to give the coach that flexibility. So they are going to have. They are going to be building up cap space, a small amount of cap space, but some amount of cap space that they can use at the end of the year. And I think the Oilers are really going to be in the market for 1 or 2 defensemen and 1 or 2 forwards who are willing to take the Derek Ryan kind of contract. Holland referred to Derek Ryan in the 2-year deal as a real pro, like it's kind of his highest compliment. So I think they're going to be looking for some other real players. They kind of lacked it on defense last year because Ryan Murray didn't pan out. He was not up to snuff, and Slater Kukuk was he was out all year. So I think they need to sign a couple defensemen. They need better defensive depth, and they need some. It's going to be tough because the players that they sign are the pros that they sign in these depth positions are going to be in tough to make the NHL. They're probably going to be spending a large part of the year earning their $800,000, $900,000 in the AHL. And so that kind of, it's a limiting factor, I think, on what kind of player is going to take that contract, but they need to find some good players who are willing to do that, take that risk of not being on the 22-man roster while earning NHL money in the AHL. So
one-way deals, you're saying?
I think that's how you'd entice them. Yeah. Is by that. That would, because otherwise you'd go to some other organization. Like money talks, and I think that's what they're going to do.
Well, that gets expensive for the owner.
It does.
Paying NHL salaries for guys in the minors. They like to pick their spots there, but I think they got a couple guys down there that are already in that category. I'd have to relook at the contracts of guys like Brad Malone and Greg McKegg and players like that. Anyway, they've got Seth Griffith guys down there that are on NHL contracts at least, and I don't think they're all two ways. And you're right that would be way more enticing to the player, but that would require an all-in from the the owner to go along with that as a strategy. But
Seth Griffith is indeed signed up for one more season, and so is Malone, and so is McKegg. So, and then they have
signed the patented 2-year Ken Holland contract.
Yes, indeed. Cam Dineen is signed for one more year. Mm-hmm. So these are all not really NHL quality players. Maybe Dineen. Let's see how much. Let me see if I can find out. Uh, okay, who am I looking at here? Griffith makes $450,000 in the minors,
Okay.
and Malone makes $250,000 in the minors, and McCaig makes $250,000 in the minors, and Deneen makes
Yeah.
210,000. So
Those are
it's
generous AHL pay, but
especially
that's
for,
not full one-way contracts, any of them.
and these are guys, Bruce, that I don't think are really, they're not who I'm talking about, like in terms
Right.
of what the quality of player the Oilers need. So I think you're going to have to pay more. Now, will Cates be willing to do that? Well, he's shown a proclivity to spend what it takes in the past. So he's been an excellent owner in that regard. I think he might. And this segues a little bit into Frank Saravalli, who was on Oilers Now and this week and talked about, it was kind of a somewhat cryptic comment because we're not exactly sure what he meant, but he's just talking about the need for the Oilers not to be complacent. And just because they got, they gave Vegas the toughest series Vegas got, and it's 2 years in a row they've been beat by the Cup finalists. Saravalli says, hold on a second here. His quote is, I also think every spring the NHL is littered with teams that think that the Cup could have been them. And I think my one concern would be that the Oilers potentially lull themselves into a complacency, essentially because they played Vegas so tough. He says, I don't think the Oilers need seismic changes, but I think to sit back this summer and rest on your laurels of that success, of the success that you've had, is probably a foolish way to think about it. I'm not saying the Oilers are, but I think that's the danger in a team, that you feel like you had their number for most of the year and fell short in the postseason, but you can fall into that trap. He talked about the Oilers needing to make incremental 1% to 5% changes. I'm not exactly sure. It sounded like he did specify. He was talking about bottom line players and third line players. I think there's a real hole on the Oilers' third line center, and they attempted to fill that last year with Nick Bjugstad, and I doubt he's going to be back.
Right.
So the hope will then be Ryan McLeod, who actually stepped up into that role in the playoffs. I think there's it's a coin flip whether Ryan McLeod can fill that position in a way that can help you win the Stanley Cup, which is that's a high bar. Like, I think you could do it on an average NHL team, on an okay NHL team. He can play third line center all day long. Can Ryan McLeod play third line center, be one of the core 12 players on the team on a Stanley Cup winner? And I think that's a real question mark. And I think if the Oilers are going to, if we're talking about not being complacent and grinding away and finding something extra, that's what I would like to see, Bruce, is that a real competition for McLeod at third line center. And if it's not Bjugstad, who would fit into that category if they could bring him back on the right price? But if it's not him, someone else then, who is that kind of classic third line checking center, who you can plug in there against Jack Eichel next year in the playoffs and have him hold his own defensively. That, to me, would be the player they should try to get this summer at a bargain contract, which probably, that's in the $1 million range, maybe a bit more than that if you need to go a bit higher. Your thoughts?
Yeah, they can't afford to go a little bit higher.
Yeah.
With very many of them, which is why Bjugstad is, he's coming off a 17-goal season where he made 900,000, and on Oilers cap he was only 450,000. Well, no matter who you're replacing with, you got to find 325,000 at least just to get up to the minimum. But Bjugstad himself is probably looking for in the 1.5 to even $2 million range with 30-year-old center winger who can take face-offs, kill penalties, right shot, scored 17 goals last year, was a plus player in Arizona and Edmonton. And, he had a strong season. And so he hasn't got too many big money contracts in his future. In fact, his big one is surely in his past. But he is going to make 7 figures again this year, but I really don't think it's going to be in Edmonton. And
do you think McLeod could do it, Bruce? Do you think he
Uh,
can step up and be like what I'm saying?
well, I
It's a
think
coin
he's
flip.
been the 3C for
He has.
much of the time. Before Bukestad came, I mean, he had a couple injuries of his own this year,
Yeah.
but he was closer to being the 3C because the coaches didn't really go with McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins all down the middle model at all. So it was usually McLeod on third line. Once in a while it was McLeod or Shore, that was filling in at center down there. And then once they got Bukestad, it kind of shorted up a little bit. But uh, McLeod is a guy, and he's due a raise. He worked for 798,000 last year. He's got He's got DARB rights. He's got a little bit more of a track record to bargain on, and the figure I'm hearing bandied about for him is $2 million. I mean, I'd like to think 1.5, but even that's like doubling what he got last year, and it's
Do
just
you
all
th-
these incremental increases that
do you think
Hall.
he can be a center on a Stanley Cup win, a third line center, part of the core 12 on a Stanley Cup winning team next season?
Ooh. Uh, on the right team with the right line mates, yeah, I think he's improving. He's gotten better. He's got some real sort of strong, solid sort of skills for the prototype 3C. He can really skate. That's his biggest thing. He's a big fella. He can control the puck, and he just needs to. I think he still needs to harden his game a little bit, and just he was doing it this year in spots. He had some games where he played real tough, and other games where he was kind of a spectator, and he needs more of those games where he's real tough. But I do think he's made progress in that area. It's not his natural game, and so he's adding that as he goes. And he's still just really what is he now? 20? Is he
23.
23? Yeah, like he's like the youngest guy on the team, except for well, he's
He'll,
he's
he'll
older
be
than
24
Bouchard
this
by
year.
a month. He's older than
23
Bouchard
and
by a month.
266 days,
Yeah.
according to
So.
Hockey Reference. Bruce, I think the answer is yes as
Mhm.
well. And I think that I liked, by the end of the year, I liked the checking line of McLeod, Ryan, and Fogle. I thought that has the right potential to be a shutdown line. And I think and again, I'm going to stress this because I've come to really believe this. If the Oilers adopt a sounder structure defensively, where the defensemen aren't wandering all over the D zone and just hold the fort in front of the net, that's going to make it easier for the centers, easier for McLeod. The structure will be simpler, and they will all improve defensively. And I think he was close to being an okay defensive center in a checking role last year. He was kind of inconsistent. I also think sometimes young players who have had some offensive success at other leagues always have it in mind they want to score goals and be goal scorers, and that's how they're going to get their value and get their worth. So if he can get paid on it, like if he gets a 2-year deal and they make clear his role, he's not going to suffer from Andrew Cogliano-itis. When Cogliano was here, the story was, he just wants to be in a top 6 forward and score points.
Center.
And it was only center, and it's only after he got traded that he figured it out. And he really figured it out, but it took getting traded. I think with Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins, and McDavid ahead of you at center, it's a pretty clear message what your role might be, and you could probably fairly easily accept it. So the role is clear. His pecking order on the team is clear. He's got size. He's got speed. He's okay at faceoffs. He's okay defensively. He's just got to bring his game up a little bit more in each area. And the Oilers, in terms of team defensive structure, have to bring up their entire game a little bit more. I think these aren't huge steps for him to take, for the team to take or for him to take. And I think that both the team and Ryan McLeod can do it, and he can be the leader of the third line that the team needs him to be. But there's a chance it won't happen too. And at this point, it's a coin flip, but a coin flip's not that bad of odds. It's not great. So this is why I'd like to see, though, them cover themselves and bring in someone else in case it comes up tails. Then you have someone else who's then got a one quarter chance of stepping into that role and succeeding. So all your eggs aren't in one basket.
We can always bring in Colton Sevier on PTO. I mean, there's going to be some of that kind of stuff. Obviously, not that exact
Yeah,
player,
is
but
Manny Malhotra still
that
playing?
class of player. Yeah. But this is where Holland's talking about, we've got work to do. We're challenged, he says. And he's talking about salary cap going up next season, as in 24, 25. But in the upcoming season, it looks like it's only going to go up. He said the first year I was here, the cap was 81.55. Well, actually, 4 years later, the cap is 83.5. In that time, Yamamoto wants a raise, Puljujärvi wants a raise, Bouchard wants a raise, McLeod wants a raise, Skinner wants a raise, Nurse wants a raise. We trade for Ekholm, we sign Hyman, we sign Kane. Things are tight, money is tight. It's a salary cap word. A classic Ken Holland short sentences repeating sort of the major theme of it. But all these players do want raises, and some of them got them last year, and some of them are about to get them this year with Bouchard and McLeod being on the top of that list, and of course Skinner, who's already signed for this year. But and then later on, they asked him about being involved in free agency, and he said we can't afford $4, $5, $6 million contracts. We probably can't even afford a $2.5 or $3 million contract, and that's just the truth. It's a hard truth. And people that are angry with Ken Holland, and I spoke to a few of them on the internet last night, with the usual outcome of general intransigence on everybody's part, including
Tears and blocking.
No, never blocking. Try and keep it a civilized conversation. But Holland is, he's painted himself into this corner himself. You could certainly make that case. But my case is, well, this is where we are right now. You can relitigate the Darnell Nurse contract until the cows come home. It ain't changing, right? It's signed. It's done. He's here. It's part of the issue of what they're dealing with. And you no matter how mad you want to get at the GM for a contract he committed to 2 years ago in a very different market than right now, it's not going to change. You're not just going to magically disappear the guy and his contract like some apparently would like to do. And I mean, maybe it is an overpay, and it probably is an overpay, but it's not like an overpay by $6 or $7 million. It's not like a boat anchor contract like Lucic or Neal, where you're paying the guy and he's performing at an entry level. That's not the case here. You've got a $6 or $7 million defenseman easy that's making $9 million. So okay, you got to make that up somehow. But blaming the woes of the entire organization on the one contract and the guy who signed it is a little simplistic, and it doesn't solve anything. Like, it's there now. Make that case 2 years ago before the contract was signed, or 4 years ago, and some of these guys did, and they were
some of them did. They did
right at the time. We're saying no, they should sign Nurse now, because when he comes to free agency next time, boy, is that going to be expensive. And sure, they were right. And the reason they extended them back then was they were in salary cap hell then. It's been a long-term issue with this team. So
I think it was a rough year for Darnell Nurse, Bruce, and I think it was a rough year because they were playing a system which brought out the worst in him. A super aggressive system on defense for a super aggressive player. And what did that add up to? Darnell Nurse trying to do way too much game in, game out. And it accentuated the negative in his game. They might have thought, well, we're building a system around what he's really good at, being super aggressive and fast and agile. No, actually, it didn't work out that way. And I really put a lot of responsibility on the coaches for what went wrong defensively this year with the Oilers. And I do expect the coaches to fix that. And hope maybe we could even talk to one of the coaches. Maybe they'll deign to talk to us, and we can ask them in person what they think about this.
That'd be awesome. You did that with a couple of coaches in the past, eh?
Playfair I talked to about the PK, because
Right.
I was just like trying to figure out what's going on. Why is this PK so good? Like, this is a little different. But we would be respectful. I mean, I've interviewed thousands of people and athletes and over the years. So it would be. I'm going to see if they'll agree to it. Like, they don't. The Oilers' policy is that they don't give interviews anymore. They don't give interviews to bloggers. Well, what the Oilers are going to find is, with the mainstream media now disappearing, is everyone's a blogger. Jason Gregor is going to be a blogger Are they going to give interviews to him and not to the Cult of Hockey? So I just think they might have to rethink their policy, and I'm going to talk to them about it and see what happens. Probably nothing, but it's worth asking, because it's not like we want to talk to them all the time, but now and then I think it would serve their purposes and certainly serve us and our readers and listeners to talk to them. So
I recall you interviewing Billy Moores years ago. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, he was McTavish, when he was GM on Hockey Strategy. It's just like we have specific questions.
Right.
I certainly have certain obsessions that aren't being asked about by other people. Like they're not on other people's minds. So sometimes every now and then I just think, geez, I'd really like to talk to these guys and see what they're thinking. And this is one of those moments. So I'll give it a shot. Bruce, let's leave it there. Unless you have anything you want to add.
No, I think that's pretty much all covered, other than best wishes to TSN 1260 personnel, best wishes to Noah Philp, and best wishes to Oil fans. These are troubling and trying times. We know our team is close, and yet to some, if you're not the one team on top, it's a failure of a season. And it's a 97% fail rate in the NHL with that logic, but the Oilers they're getting there, but it's there's, as Ken Holland himself has said many times, there's no guarantees. You just want to be in there with a shot year after year, and we'll see where it goes next year.
Indeed. And again, Bruce, thanks for bringing up the TSN people and Noah Philp, and to everyone struggling. We are the faithful and we are with you. And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.